Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for being here for this last final press conference of AAS 244 here in Madison, Wisconsin. It is Wednesday at 2:15 p.m. and we are gathered today to talk about citizen science from the 2023 and 2024 solar eclipses. So this is going to be a topic very similar to Monday afternoon's special session, and it's giving us the opportunity to get some insight into the first results from some of the citizen science that came out of these eclipses that passed across North America. So my name is Susanna Kohler. I'm the press officer of the AAS, and I'm joined here by Ben Casses, our AAS Media Fellow, and Carrie Hensley, the Deputy Press Officer for the AAS. They will be assisting me with taking questions in the room and monitoring the Zoom. So we are joined by some folks online in the Zoom webinar who are going to be able to ask questions via Zoom and participate in that way. And we're also streaming this live to YouTube. So don't say anything you don't want recorded for posterity there. This will be archived there later. So you'll be able to access this video in the future. So today we're going to be hearing from 4 presenters. Our first one is going to be a remote presenter, Amir Caspi, who's here from the Southwest Research Institute, and he's going to present on Citizen CATE 2024, extending Eclipse totality with a community participant distributed observing network. Then we're going to hear from Angela Desjardins on the nationwide Eclipse ballooning project, Science from the Edge of Space, and Angela's from Montana State University. Then Don Davies from the Hill Country Alliance will talk about the LightSound project, experiencing solar eclipses through sound. And last up, Kate Russo from Being in the Shadow will talk about capturing the awe and wonder of solar eclipses through changes in our brainwaves. Bit of an unusual topic for an astronomy conference, and I'm excited about this. Piloting Project Awe. So our press kit is updated online at this point. It doesn't yet have the sessions from this morning, but it's got everything else, and I'll have it updated by the end of today with the press releases and slides from the other speakers we've had. And I believe we have a press release, 2 press releases coming out from this session, so we'll get those included as well. If you're online joining us and you'd like to ask questions, take note of the Q&A feature in the Zoom webinar. We will be monitoring that, and we'll get to the questions at the end. The way we'll do this is we'll go back to back, have all of the speakers present, and then we'll move to a joint Q&A session for the whole group. So we'll get to any questions we see online. Unfortunately, we are not monitoring the chat on YouTube, so you won't be able to ask questions there. With that, I think we are good to get started. Just a note if you're in the room to silence any cell phones or anything else that might make noise. So I'm going to go ahead and switch us over to be able to hear from Amir. So Amir, if you want to go ahead and start your screen sharing. And you can go ahead and unmute as well.
You'd think after 4 years of using Zoom, I'd remember to unmute.
There is never enough using Zoom to get to that stage. I don't know why that's the case, but it is. Okay, let's see. We've got you featured. We see your slides. Over to you, Amir. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. Thanks everybody for being here. I'm excited to share a status update on the Citizen CATE 2024 experiment that we ran for the eclipse that happened this past April 8, where we partnered with 35 teams of community participants to observe the eclipse. I couldn't think of a better way to really share this with you all except for a picture show. So I'm going to show you a whole lot of pictures with a little bit of explanation. And obviously, you're welcome to ask questions whenever the appropriate time is. But hopefully this will convey what the project is all about and what we were trying to do. The author list here does not include everybody. For the next iteration of this, we're going to have all 200 some participants on the author list, and it'll scroll by like credits. It'll take a whole movie to do it. But thank you to the National Science Foundation and to NASA for making this experiment possible through their generous funding. So the solar corona, the sun's outermost atmosphere, is what we are really interested in studying. And as you can see from this movie, from the GOES solar ultraviolet imager up in space, There is a huge amount of dynamics in the solar corona. There are loops, there are jets, there are things changing their shapes, there are things that are exploding out into space. And a lot of this is stuff that we can't see half of the time. It occurs farther out in the corona, in where we call the middle corona. Now, what you see here is a special campaign that was made to observe this section, but normally this is what you see. You see space-based observations that look at the sun, and they only have a limited field of view. And then you have these space-based coronagraphs that make artificial eclipses that look farther away. But in between, there's this big gap where we can't see these dynamics. We can't see the physics that connects the inner corona to the outer corona and how all of that energy and material is transferred. And this is a region that's rich with physics, and we really want to learn about it. There are ground-based coronagraphs that make observations all the time, and they cover a lot of this region. But ground-based coronagraphs that make their own artificial eclipses have to contend with the fact that they're looking through the bright sky. And that limits how much they can see and how far out they can see. And that's what makes total solar eclipses so special, because they give us a dark sky. They give us almost nighttime quality observing, but with the benefit of being able to use ground-based telescopes and cameras that can take really high quality images that you may not be able to get from space. Now, one of the problems with solar eclipses, of course, is if you're just one person on the ground, a solar eclipse is a fleeting few minutes as the shadow passes over you. And you only get to see it for those few minutes. Now, there's a lot of physics in the solar corona that takes much longer than just a few minutes. It can take many minutes, tens of minutes, maybe even hours. The only way to see that is if you could somehow capture all of totality as it crosses all of the available landmass. And that's exactly what the Citizen CATE 2024 experiment did. It deployed 35 teams of telescopes, identical telescopes, cameras, mounts, and computers with people who were trained to use them so that we could make these observations. And this is impractical to do with a bunch of professionals. We had to reach out to communities, and we wanted to reach out to the communities that lived along the eclipse path so that they could help us experience this eclipse and record it for science. The science that we're trying to address is actually measuring a special aspect of light called the polarization of light. And you may know that light is a wave. The direction in which that light waves is called its polarization. And even if you're not really familiar with this in a scientific term, most people are familiar with the polarization of light because they wear polarizing filters on their face most of the time. They're called polarizing sunglasses. And you can see the effect that these have because polarizing sunglasses, they cut out glare, reflections off of surfaces that happen to be polarized in a particular way. Now, for the sun, it turns out the light from the solar corona is also polarized. And if we use these polarizing filters, we can measure that polarization. And what you're seeing here are measurements that were taken by some of our community participant leaders in Australia in 2023 for that solar eclipse. And the image that you're seeing is bouncing back and forth between two different angles of polarization. It's kind of like taking your sunglasses and turning them 90 degrees as you're looking at the eclipse. You can see that the structure of the corona looks different at those different angles. It's much easier if I highlight it with multiple colors so that you can see blue is that one angle, gold is the other angle, and where you see things that are white, it's because there's no angle of polarization there. That light is being made in a different way than the polarized light that's coming from elsewhere in the corona. And measuring that polarization actually gives us information that we can't get any other way. It tells us about what's happening in the corona, how structures are changing, and how much material is there in the corona, and we can't get that through other means. And of course, instead of just looking at two angles, we can look at all of the angles of polarization. And what you see here is where each color represents an angle of polarization, and you can see how that changes as you go all around the sun. So there's a paper for this that if you want to look at, it came out just a couple months ago from our Australian eclipse. So for 2024, we got into the business of getting a lot of equipment. We bought 35 sets of equipment, cameras, laptops, telescopes, tripods, and we packed it all very tightly into special travel cases so that people could take them to the eclipse. And all of this equipment was given to our teams and their communities. After the experiment, their communities keep this equipment to use as a resource far into the future. We held training workshops with our community leaders, and they in turn took that training and trained the local teams where everyone practiced and practiced and practiced before the eclipse. And for those of you in Madison, I just wanted to highlight, if you're doing local Madison news, there was a team from Madison, Wisconsin at One City Schools that joined us and participated and helped us take some of this amazing data. So to give you the gist up front, we had 35 teams, but over 10 times that number of applicants for those teams. And it was a real difficulty to select everyone. We had over 225 community participants for 43 observing stations. Over 50% of our participants and leaders were women. We had 2 teams with Indigenous participation, many Latino and Latina participants across the country. 10 student lead trainers. Over 50% of our teams had student participation, including 1 Air Force cadet team. And incredibly, we had 100% success in team participation. Every single team went out to observe the eclipse. And you can see some of these pictures here that our teams submitted where they were setting up. They were all very excited to observe. And again, this is just a picture show to highlight how community participants were able to take telescopes and training and make observations for the eclipse all across the country in the name of science. Now, not everybody got eclipse. There were a few sites that unfortunately got clouded out, but for the most part, most of our sites did get eclipses. You can see here the computers with the special software that they were using to make observations. Some of them started analyzing the data themselves, which was really fun. And some people even caught some really cool solar features, so to speak. One of our teams saw an airplane in front of the total eclipse, and another team caught skydivers in front of the eclipse. And this is actually in our data. So we had 36 community participant teams. Over 85% of them had full or partial success. We had some professionally led and outreach stations as well. All in all, our community participants took over 47,000 images of totality, over 1 terabyte of images from just 4 minutes each of eclipse, over 86,000 total images, over 2 terabytes of data that they're all mailing back to us. And we're currently analyzing all of that data now. I want to show you a handful of those things. So we took some of the images from selected sites as they went from Mexico all the way up to Maine, and to show you essentially how the sun changes as the eclipse progressed. Now, we're still working on analyzing these images. We're still looking for the differences between them. We're still working on exactly co-aligning them all so that we can compare every one of these to itself very well. But these are processed in the same way that you saw, where color and polarization angle are matched. And then we can also represent the data in a different way, where we look at how much polarization there is, how bright is the polarization. And that starts to bring out a lot of different features in the sun, in the corona. Here you can see an example from North Texas, an observation from Missouri, and an observation from Maine. And these are going to be the data sets that we're going to look at to start to look for changes in how the corona was evolving over this 1 hour period that all of our teams were observing. So if you want to follow along, all of the results will be public. All of the data will be public. We'll be posting updates on our website. And you can, of course, follow us along on social media as well. Thanks.
That might be the most beautiful QR code I've ever seen. Thank you, Amir. And we will go ahead and go into the room now. Let me make sure that the meeting controls don't get in your way.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm Angela Desjardins, and I'm very happy to be here today. I have enough material for probably 3 hours worth of talk, but I'm going to squeeze that into like 8 minutes. I don't know if you've heard the Dua Lipa song Houdini. There's a line that says, "Time is passing like a solar eclipse." So this time is definitely going to pass like a solar eclipse, super fast. This title slide actually means a lot to me. I could spend a lot of time just talking about this slide. The most important part is all those logos represent all of the people who came together to make this project successful. So what does our project do? So the project has been sending up balloons into the stratosphere for solar eclipses since 2017. The really great thing about using high altitude balloons is that they really go up into a space-like environment. So up to about 100,000 feet, typical flights last about 2 hours. And as you can see, this is an image actually taken during the annular eclipse from one of our engineering balloons. From that vantage point, you can see the curvature of the Earth and the blackness of space. So it's just a really wonderful environment. Also, to make balloon flights like this happen, it takes a really multidisciplinary team, and it's like a mini mission. And so having that experience for the students is really wonderful. And these balloons, which you may, be more familiar with than you were before the whole Chinese balloon incident, they're naturally occurring latex balloons, just like party balloons, but bigger. So for this iteration, the fourth iteration of the nationwide eclipse ballooning projects, we have two different tracks: atmospheric science and engineering. The atmospheric science teams flew GRA radiosondes, which are small little instruments. The person in the picture there is holding one in her left hand. They're the same instruments that the National Weather Service flies at least twice a day, every day, from the 92 different locations around the US, exact same instruments. They measure location, temperature, humidity, and wind. So those teams flew one of those once an hour, every hour, 24 hours before the eclipse and 6 hours after. So 30 balloons in total for each eclipse, each team. The engineering team, on the other hand, flew just between 1 and 3 balloons with payloads that they made themselves, included also weather sensors, accelerometers, and multiple different kinds of cameras, as well as their own individually designed experiments. So there's a lot of information about the participants. Even though I'd love to talk about the amazing science that is done, at the heart of it, it's really the student participants that matter to me. Over 10 years of doing this, the thing that really matters to me. I wish I had more time to talk about this, but I'll just leave it at these statistics for the moment. So what were our science goals? The overarching goal of our project was to measure the atmospheric response to the cold, dark shadow of the moon in the middle of the day. One of the main things that we're wanting to get from that is if we can understand how the atmosphere responds in the special case of eclipses, we can understand the atmosphere better in general. And better understanding the atmosphere in general can help us be able to predict the weather, help us model climate change, things like that. One of the main things we're looking for in understanding how the atmosphere responds is looking for gravity waves. This shouldn't be confused with gravitational waves, which are tiny ripples in the fabric of space caused by things like interacting black holes. That's a different press conference. What we mean by gravity waves are, that's like ripples in a pond, only in the atmosphere. They happen all the time. They're caused by things like changing temperatures from day to night, and also things like mountain ranges. So they can actually propagate high up into the atmosphere. And that's part of what the main thing that we're looking for. So we have been looking for eclipse-driven gravity waves since the first eclipse that we did in 2017. We saw the first evidence for eclipse-driven gravity waves from the 2019 eclipse in Chile. We had one team that we sent down from Montana there, and we have that work published in a Nature paper. We wanted to expand to more than one site. So one of the drawbacks, however, of that evidence is it's just one site and one balloon per hour. We wanted to expand to 4 teams for the December 2020 eclipse, but a little pandemic got in the way of having 4 different locations, although we were able to have 2 different locations for that eclipse. But in addition to that challenge, there was an atmospheric river, which made the data messy. So to really see the eclipse-driven gravity waves well, we needed to have more locations and better time resolution. So therefore, that's why we had 19 different atmospheric science teams spread across the paths of totality for both eclipses. For the October eclipse, we formed a supersite in New Mexico where we had 4 teams working together to share, to do lots of different flights. So having 4 teams together in the same location allowed us to fly another radio sonde up into the stratosphere every 15 minutes. And so that gave us a really nice high time resolution. So this plot is a little complicated. I'm going to walk you through it a little bit. So these are temperature changes as seen on October 13th and 14th during the annular eclipse. So the color codes here are temperature, and you can see you see my cursor? Okay, you can see the color bar here on the right, and the horizontal axis is time, so starting 24 hours before the start of the annular eclipse and going to 30 hours after. The vertical axis is height into the stratosphere, up into the atmosphere, up to 30 kilometers. And on the both panels, you can see the dotted red line. That's the sunset from the night before, so sunset on the 13th. The solid red line is sunrise on the 14th, and the black lines represent the eclipse. The left-hand panel is data from the supersite, so our data, and the right-hand panel is the European Center reanalysis. And what that is it's global observations smoothed and combined with models. So you can see here in the left-hand panel on our data in the upper right corner, you can see bands of higher and lower temperatures. Those are propagating gravity waves. And for those of you who don't remember, the stratosphere is defined, it depends on your location on Earth, but above about 15 kilometers. So down here at the bottom is the start of the stratosphere. So these are propagating gravity waves in the stratosphere, and they're different in period and wavelength compared to, you can see there's also some gravity waves here generated from sunset, but they're different in their speed and period and wavelength from those. If you look over here at the reanalysis, you don't see any gravity waves. This is a similar plot, but instead of looking at temperature, here we're looking at meridional wind, which is north-south flowing wind. And you can see, again, here we can see gravity waves during the time of the eclipse. Both our observations and the reanalysis, you can see the general impact of the eclipse. That's this red area here of high winds, but you don't see any waves in the reanalysis. So this is the first confirmed evidence of eclipse-driven gravity waves in the stratosphere, and a paper is coming on this soon. We have lots more science to share. One of the other things is this confirms our hypothesis that the annular eclipse would generate gravity waves just like a total eclipse does, which we had seen before. Okay, so now I'm going to switch to the engineering side. So in addition to the 19 atmospheric science teams, we also had 34 engineering teams. I mentioned before all of the different kinds of things that they were doing. And you can see here, this is a snapshot from the same instance in the University of Alabama, Huntsville data. And you can see that the Insta360 camera, so there was multiple different kinds of cameras, And one of the ones was an Insta360 camera where you can see a complete surround view. And this is from one instance, and so not just completely around 360 one direction, but also up and down. Here is the Arkansas State University 360 video flattened and sped up. This is 5 times the normal speed. As I'm talking, I want you to kind of notice how the sun winks out as the eclipse comes over where the balloon is. So these 360 videos, and I'm going to share a QR code where you can find them. They're really wonderful to see. If you're on a computer, you can click and drag around and see all of the different views. If you have it on your phone, you can actually just use your phone to look all around. Or if you want to feel like an astronaut, you can pull up the YouTube 360 videos on a VR headset. And it really does, like I've done this a lot of times, it makes you feel like you're an astronaut up in space looking at the eclipse come over the Earth below you. It's really fantastic. So this is a QR code that will take you to our website, eclipse.montana.edu. And those charts that I was showing and the 360 videos are on that site. We're continuing to quality control all of the data, and all of the data, terabytes and terabytes of data, will be shared publicly on Dryad by the end of 2024. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susanna and the AAS for having me here today. My name is Dawn Davies. I'm with Hill Country Alliance, but I'm here representing on behalf of the LightSound project and the LightSound project team, which is right here. This group has been steadfastly working on LightSound devices for the past 7+ years. Allison is lead astronomer with the Center for Astrophysics, Harvard and Smithsonian, and worked on the initial design and creation in combination with Wanda Diaz-Merced, who is a postdoctoral fellow and is also a blind individual who has been revolutionizing the technology of sonification, along with Soleil Hyman, who was integral in developing a lot of the software for this device, Daniel Davis, who did a lot of the initial design work, and Elliot Richards, who was integral in making some changes and upgrades from the wired version to the PCB version, which I'll go over in a minute. So what is LightSound? So LightSound is ultimately a means for the blind and visually impaired communities to experience the eclipse. So it sonifies, turning light into sound waves that, for the sake of this instrument, comes across in various pitches, utilizing different types of instrumentation. So for this, they can be used with a phone jack that allows you to plug in earbuds, or you can actually connect this device, as it was done for many events during the eclipse, up to a speaker system to allow multiple people to experience it. This first iteration on the left was a wired version. It was very complex to assemble, usually took most of us a couple hours, or at least took me a good 2 hours to build. And over the course between the 2017 eclipse and the 2023 and 2024 eclipses, it was changed, again, thanks to Elliot, to this printed circuit board version, which is much quicker to assemble, has a rechargeable lithium-ion battery, and also has the ability to connect to a micro USB for data collection and also charging. And I'm going to play a little sound file of what it sounds like. So here they're demonstrating what the Eclipse would create with regards to sound. So in bright sunlight, it's a high-pitched flute sound. And as we move closer to totality, it dips to a low clarinet. And that clicking sound you heard is actually during totality or very dim light. And here's just some images of how that device was utilized during both the annular and total eclipse, both in 2019 and 2020, and as well as the most recent 23 and 24 eclipses. So to get all of these devices going, especially for the most recent 2 eclipses, there were over 2,400 requests from across the country and across the world over the course of 8 workshops held in 7 locations. With the help of 420 volunteers, over 900 devices were built and distributed. And those devices went out to educational institutions, science centers, to community resources, Eclipse task force managers, as well as national, state, and community park systems, and also to those who were in senior centers, and also are part of the blind and low vision community. It was used for a multitude of events, a good split of which were events where folks wanted to have inclusivity as part of their mission, and also events that were purely set aside and set up for those who needed the adaptive assistance of the LightSound device, of which many folks who've received these devices will retain them and either utilize them in part of their education and outreach or donate them to their local educational facilities. And I definitely want to note for this purpose, one of the initial members of the build team back in 2020 at a AAS meeting was Gregory Mace, Dr. Gregory Mace with the University of Texas at Austin, who actually took the workshop and then went on to be part of in producing and hosting the two main workshops that occurred at UT Austin, where I actually learned how to do these. Also integral was Bob Finney, who is the founder and president of the New England SciTech STEM Education Center Makerspace. He actually helped to lead one of the largest workshops where they built 250 devices in one day with only the assistance of 80 volunteers. And also Jessica Gilzow, who is the recreation supervisor and arts and cultural education coordinator for the city of Austin and the Austin Nature and Science Center, who I co-hosted the last workshop, pulling together the last 150 devices prior to this event. And I think it's also really important to note that this brought together a lot of community from folks all around these areas to put together these devices. And it was regardless of age. It gave folks a great opportunity to learn or hone their soldering skills, their wiring skills. My son took part in it. He was 12 at the time and managed to build 9 devices, having never soldered anything before. So this is a type of project that will continue and will really involve educating a lot of folks regardless of age or skill set. So in 2017, when this project was initiated, there were 3 devices that were utilized for the total solar eclipse, one in Wyoming in Jackson Hole, and the other 2 in Kentucky. And following the success of those devices working, it went through a revision. And thanks to grants and funding and wonderful partnership, they shipped out and utilized 20 in the 2019 Eclipse, and through further grants and further partnerships with various folks, including Paulina Troncaso, who was the Argentinian collaborator, and Beatriz Garcia, who was the Chilean collaborator, they built over 100 devices for 2020. And then, of course, comes the annular eclipse of 23 and 24. I couldn't even put 900 dots on that map, but you get the general idea. And the distribution was quite impressive. So all in all, the vast majority of those devices in the United States went to places like Texas, Ohio, also to Indiana. And we found that in Canada, Mexico, they had a tremendous interest and draw. And there were locations and countries where they utilized and made these requests outside of the path and on. So as far as the data, the main focus of these devices was to get these devices in the hands of folks that can use them, can utilize them, and need them for the purpose of experiencing this eclipse. But we did have some folks who were beneficial in providing data, and fortunately, the data they provided matches almost right on with the type of weather conditions that were held in those locations. So it's easy to see that there's an obvious dip in all of these charts and graphs, which relates to the time of totality on these timeframes in these locations. And of course, the varying lines of blue back and forth is indicative of the cloud cover that a lot of us experience going back and forth. But thankfully, the data matches the weather. And so we hope to move forward in the coming eclipses with more continued encouragement and education around how the data sets can be run and how we can benefit from them. Another area that was really impressive was the amount of media coverage. So with little to no reaching out to the media, engaging them, just within the last 10 months, there have been almost 140 mentions, articles, interviews, and stories about the LightSound device, and including as far out as reaching to National Geographic, to local news stations in Chicago, up into Canada, and even as far as Puerto Rico. And a personal favorite of mine was I got to work with the team in designing how we could get this experience to folks who were living in homes or in places where they couldn't get out publicly into areas that had devices. So we partnered with the American Council for the Blind and their American Council for the Blind's media station to produce a webinar on Zoom with 7 locations along the path of totality. And we live streamed that. And much to our surprise and happiness, we had 250 people attend that webinar, and over 2,500 people tuned in either online to ACB Media or were able to tune in on their Alexa devices. So it was actually the most accessible broadcast that they had done since 2017 Eclipse. So the future of LightSound obviously is going to be expansion, hopefully into areas with regards to the upcoming 2026 eclipse that's going to be passing through Greenland and Iceland and into Spain and Portugal. Allison is actually headed to Iceland this summer and will also be headed to the IAU conference in South Africa to promote this and connect with folks and hopefully begin creating relationships where we can provide these devices to even more communities, even more countries, and make it even more accessible for folks. And we've even got these QR codes for folks that may want to request a device. Even though we do not have the supply yet, we hope to be able to meet that and be able to get them in the hands of everybody who wants them. And also encouraging folks to learn how to host a workshop. I think that's going to be tremendously integral. As this device grows, the intention is to not only incorporate some of the light detection and color detection that's being used in a device called Orchestar, but also to include some vibrational motor elements that will allow for haptic feedback. So we'll make this device not only accessible for the blind and visually impaired, but also the deaf and hard of hearing communities as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kate, and I'm a clinical psychologist and academic with a background in phenomenological research. I'm also an eclipse chaser. On Monday, I presented the results of Project OR in a bit more detail of what we did during the annular eclipse back in October last year. Today, I'm sharing more of the personal story behind Project OR and how we were surprised by what we found. We found things we weren't expecting to find, and this has challenged my view on what we should be exploring with this methodology in the future. So this is my research colleague, the co-investigator, Drew Bailey, and he's based at University of Chattanooga in Tennessee, and he heads up the UTC Brainwaves project. I met Drew because we were both in New Zealand at the same time in December 22, presenting at the same conference. And when I saw what he was doing, the type of research where he was looking at people's brainwaves in nature environments, I got very excited because I thought this is the technology that we've been waiting for, and how amazing would it be if we could use this technology in the field to capture our experiences of a total solar eclipse. So he didn't need much convincing actually to kind of see the value in partnering up. And we were able then to take part and join together and do this pilot project in October. And the aim of the pilot project really was about testing the feasibility of the equipment and the process that's involved. You know, how long it takes to get people attached, the time processes, if we can preempt any difficulties. And the idea was then that we would do the main study during the total solar eclipse this April. As the pilot occurred during an annular eclipse, we were not expecting to capture OR specifically, but we did. I was one of the research participants, and I was not expecting to experience OR during what would be my third annular eclipse, but I did. We selected an additional 5 volunteers. I did not expect the 5 volunteers would experience OR during the annular eclipse, but they did. I also did not expect that we would capture the OR experience at several time points throughout the day. but we did. So this pilot project really did change my view about the potential for this research. And it's interesting because the emotion of awe is experienced, and there's two elements to it. We experience something about vastness and accommodation. And that means we understand that something is more powerful and greater than ourselves. And the way we think about the world after we experience that changes. And so it's really interesting that by looking at the emotion of awe and seeing awe in my brainwaves, which is actually on the screen there, and showing the evidence that I was in awe at that point. And I was subjectively feeling awe at that point too. But it's quite surprising because it changed the way I thought about the whole project. I'm one of these eclipse chasers that once I saw my first total solar eclipse, I was absolutely hooked. And that was back in 1999. And I've chased as many total eclipses as I possibly can. I've seen 14 total solar eclipses, and now I've seen 3 annulars. There is no place in the world that I will not go to experience a total solar eclipse. And it really has changed the trajectory of my life. Now, for the first 10 years of chasing, I was, I'm a clinical psychologist and academic. So I would have my profession in one side and then go off chasing on the other side. And I was really trying to convince people that, this experience is so powerful and different and unique. And someone needs to research this. And then it took me a little while to realize, I'm the perfect person to research this. So I began researching it back in 2012. And my main goal is to try and help people understand the uniqueness and how powerful the total solar eclipse experience is. And I also look at community eclipse planning because I really enjoy helping communities prepare for a total eclipse. I'm a phenomenological researcher, and that means that I interview lots of people and I go really in depth into the interviews that I do, and I try and make sense of their experience from their perspective, as well as help understand how they make sense of the experience. And, it's quite challenging because, as you know, if you've experienced a total eclipse, there are no words. Sometimes there are things that we just cannot convey in language. So there's always that challenge of being able to convey to others. And I think storytelling is really good because when you're talking about your own personal experience, that passion and what you've experienced is another way of conveying that powerfully to others. And when I do media, I use this phrase a lot because the media are always interested in, can you just give some three lines about what the total solar eclipse experience is all about? Well, it's really hard, but I have condensed it. It's totality happens above you, around you, and within you. And I guess that's the best way that I can, in a soundbite, communicate that there are so many different layers in the experience. And back in 2012, one of my first projects was to interview and survey eclipse chasers. And because I thought they were the ones who'd be able to really convey more than someone who's just seen it for the first time about what the experience is all about. And from that survey, I was able to really, really clearly identify that there were processes that everyone was saying that they went through. And with this acronym, you can see that one of the biggest things, the central component of the totality experience is awe. But the difference between the total eclipse and the annular is that there are a couple of things that happen before we experience that awe. During a total, we have that sense of wrongness, that in the moments before totality, when that darkness comes towards you and your goosebumps, kick up on the back of your neck and the hair on the back of your neck stands up and you have that fear of, oh my God, this isn't right. Something's just not right with the world. And then you're cast into that darkness. Now, those things don't happen during an annular eclipse. And this is why I wanted to capture brainwaves during the total eclipse. But isn't it interesting that even without those two first elements, we were able to capture the experience of awe during an annular eclipse? But it's that gap of ineffability that's really difficult to capture. So we do know that we can bypass language and we can capture our embodied responses to the eclipse by using this methodology, which is very exciting. And to our knowledge, this is the first time that it's ever been applied with any astronomical event, with any eclipses. And what we were able to do is look at individual responses and changes in patterns of brainwaves, as well as calculate a single OR variable that allowed us to see the changes in OR over a period of time. And this is what we found. Every time, well, not every time, but the moment that the clouds parted, allowing us to see the first opportunity to see, we didn't capture the first contact, but the first moment we could see with the naked eye using our glasses, the eclipsing sun, we all experienced awe. You can see frustration when clouds come over, and then the peak awe happened during annularity, and that was consistent across everybody. And an interesting finding is that what we were finding is that there was a little post-eclipse dip that perhaps indicates a bit of reflection, which we were not expecting at all. And from an individual perspective, what we know from the literature is that if someone was going to be experiencing awe in response to a trigger, there would be spikes in the first 3 of the channels across, which we have found, and there would be drops in the final 2 responses, which we did find. So the annular eclipse, you can see, is the largest wide width, and the blue line within that is the peak moment of annularity. So it was really exciting to see that, and it was very unexpected. And on average to the group, every participant showed changes indicative of awe. As a pilot project, though, I mean, we were not expecting to actually capture real data that we would publish. We were testing the feasibility of the project. And of course, it was not a controlled environment. We hooked people up and everyone was just doing their thing. There was music, there was lots of fun. We were doing a lot of engagement, outreach activities. There was a lot that potentially could interfere with understanding what we were actually measuring. So it limits our ability to generalize in some way. But boy, does it really highlight that this technology picks up on subtle moments of awe. And if you think about that, we can start using this methodology to capture engagement with other astronomical events. And, you know, the first time someone actually sees the moon through a telescope, anytime someone actually says, wow, that's potentially a moment that we can capture objectively their response to it. And it's really cool when you can actually then show them objectively their brain responses to that. Can you imagine how useful a tool that is to help engage young people with astronomical events? So thank you very much. And our contact details are as below, and you're welcome to contact us directly by email. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you. This is really exciting. Let me go ahead and get the screen back so that Amir can join us. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and go into our Q&A session now. So Carrie has the microphone. If you have any questions in the room, go ahead and put up your hand and Carrie will bring you the mic. If you have questions online, please queue them up in the Q&A and Ben can read them out. And for anybody who's asking questions, both in the room or online, if you could please identify yourself and your affiliation before you ask your question, that would be great.
Thank you, Rick Feinberg, freelance. Question for Angela. I got a little confused about one thing. When you were showing the side-by-side illustrations of the gravity waves and the 2 different analyses, you said that the gravity waves disappeared in the European reanalysis, and I was confused about what that actually means. Does it mean that depending on how you process the data, you do or you don't see gravity waves? Because right after you showed those slides, you said, we've confirmed that the eclipse creates gravity waves. So I just got a little lost there.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So we see the gravity waves in our data. The reanalysis is just like a smoothing of all of the different weather stations around the world and then put together with the model. And so when you have that kind of smoothing, you don't see the gravity waves because it's not local anymore, right? And so we do see with our very careful data, we see the gravity waves. And we don't expect in that kind of reanalysis through the European center model, we don't expect to see gravity waves. It takes something like what we are doing to be able to see the details of the gravity waves.
Some questions online.
Yeah, sure. This is one from Ethan Siegel from Starts with a Bang for Kate Russo. He wants to know, with the number of total solar eclipses coming up over the next few years, including the longest episode of Totality for the rest of the 21st century coming up in 2027, what are the next things you'd hope to measure or quantify with respect to the human response to solar eclipses?
It's always quite challenging, isn't it? Because I'm torn as a chaser. I want to experience totality in full, but as a researcher, I actually want to research. The long eclipses actually give us a really good opportunity to be able to do research, I think, and really do it justice. So I haven't finalized any plans, but I would hope at some point to be able to do a project or with during a long total solar eclipse. We also have we've got 4 more total solar eclipses happening in Australia in the next 10 years or so. And I'm based in Australia, and it might be that that's far more practical to be able to do it from that perspective.
You
I have a
more?
question.
Yeah.
Ben Cassess at the AAS. This one's for Dawn. I was curious how you settled on the flute sound. Like how do you choose what sound would come out of the box?
Well, I didn't settle on that. That was something that the team decided. My guess is it's based on they wanted a differentiation between instrumentation that could be clearly identifiable. This system, the way the programming is designed, if you have experience programming in Arduino, you can actually change which instruments are conveyed audibly. So there's a lot of opportunity to edit and play around with it. It's a very lucrative design, and it's all open source. All the design and the build down to the 3D printing of the case. So folks that have that type of skill set can definitely play around with whatever instrumentation they like.
So I have a follow-up question for Dawn, Susanna Kohler, AAS. Just could you talk a little bit about what some of the responses were to from people who have used these devices when they actually had the opportunity to do so during an eclipse?
Absolutely. It actually was a bit of a challenge in coming up with some quotes to provide to the AAS because there were so many amazing responses. I actually had both the device out where I was with about 250 people in the Texas Hill Country, and we were also listening to the live stream. And most of the folks that I've engaged with and that a lot of us have engaged with, have never heard of such a device, didn't know it was even possible. So the first thing I think is just amazement, a little bit of awe, and a deep sense of appreciation that this is the type of device that's accessible. And I think, it's for more than just the blind and visually impaired community. The vast majority of the folks that I've engaged with don't fall into that category, but appreciate having the opportunity to experience the eclipse using another one of their senses. So all in all, it's just been tremendously positive excitement and just a lot of delight in having a new way for not only the sighted individuals to experience it, but making something so accessible to such a large community that did not have this ability before. The vast majority of people are just really grateful that that is something that's offered.
Yeah, that's great.
Hi there, Ann Sizer, and from PBS. And this question is for Amir. I was wondering whether or not the 35 setups that you had were equidistant from each other. And also, as you analyze the polarization data, can you step back and explain what you might be learning or what you're hoping to learn from it as you colorize it and why it's important for us to know?
Excellent questions. So the sites were equidistant in time, but not in physical kilometers. The way that we spaced everything out is we wanted to buy some additional risk reduction. So every site had overlap with its two neighbors in terms of when the shadow passed over them. The idea was that if somebody suffered some equipment failure or there were local clouds that might have blocked out one site, as long as their neighboring sites got data, everybody would still have a continuous data set. Ultimately, it didn't quite work out that way. With the clouds that we had, obviously were widespread in the areas that they existed, but nonetheless, we still got a lot of observations. So yeah, they were equidistant in time, but not in distance. For the polarization data, the colorization is really just a way of trying to visualize polarization, because the human eye can't easily see polarization, right? We don't pick that up on a daily basis in a conscious way. But if you could focus on polarization, what might it look like? So we colorize it in that way, more as a visualization technique. The scientific analysis is much more about the other data that I showed at the end, the so-called polarized brightness, and there are a few other different measurements where we can manipulate the, when I say manipulate, calculate the polarization properties by combining the data in different ways. And when you put that data together, what you're really using is you're using that polarization as a tool, as a diagnostic tool to figure out what is happening in the corona. So the polarization tells you some amount of information about how much stuff there is, how much plasma there is in the corona, because the light is interacting with that plasma. That's why it gets polarized. So the amount of polarization tells you how much there is there. And the direction of the polarization can tell you some things about the local structure there in the corona, because the way that the light gets polarized depends on the relative angles, basically, between where the light is made and where it starts interacting in the corona. And finally, there's a really cool thing about polarization, which is because of the way that the physics works on the polarization, the angles that are involved, it actually gives you a little bit of information about that third dimension. So instead of looking like a flat picture in the sky, the polarization tells you a little bit about where the light came from in the depth portion of that image. And that's something that, for example, the Punch mission that NASA is launching next year is going to be making measurements quite similar to that. So the CATE 2024 measurements and hopefully future measurements as well will tie into that same kind of physical measurement. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, it did. Do we have any more questions online? Yep.
This is from Camille Carlisle of Car and Telescope for Kate Russo. Devil's advocate question. Why is it a good thing to quantify human experience this way? Do we really need to have data on the visceral experiences like this? And by collecting the data, are we distancing ourselves from the experience and inadvertently making it even more abstract?
Interesting question. It's funny, when I first started eclipse chasing and seeing many total solar eclipses and starting to talk about it in astronomical groups especially, people will say, well, we should just hook you up and see what your brainwaves are saying. And I would actually come back with the response of, why would you want to? We already know it's so powerful and wonderful. What else could that actually tell you? But it's something about an objective measure of which highlights how intense it is, that it's affecting us. It's affecting the actual way our brain is processing. It's punchy, isn't it? You can't fight that objective evidence when you see it. So there's something really powerful about being able to go really deep into the individual experience. So I don't think we really need to do research where everybody is hooked up and everybody downloads all their brainwaves to the eclipse experience, because I do agree that would take the focus away from what it's all about. But it's more just another tool for us to be able to communicate to other people about how intense the experience is, and that it is different. But even a partial eclipse under cloudy conditions triggers awe. So we still need to know how it is different when we experience a total solar eclipse, because wow, that level of awe, that would be great to capture.
Quick follow-up, because that was a great question and a really great answer too. What about, say, well, a lot of us, you know, we tell people we think that a total solar eclipse is the most awesome thing. You could actually, through the kind of research you're talking about, you could actually, with the same people, you could subject them to different kinds of awesome experiences, right? And try to figure out, you know, does one kind of experience produce more awe than another? It'd be interesting to see that across, you know, a statistically interesting sample of people. It could also tell you, it could serve as a lie detector, because there is the occasional person who says, it was all right, but, you know, not that exciting. It'd be interesting to see if they actually are just, you know, blowing smoke there.
That's true. But it's such a subjective experience though, isn't it? And it's like you can get a large group of people and only a small proportion of those will actually become a very, very hardcore eclipse chaser, like I personally am, like a lot of the eclipse chasing community is. So there's something about some individuals are much more tuned in and responsive on a physical level. And these are the people that we would be really able to learn a lot from, I think. For example, I get goosebumps all the time. I can trigger goosebumps. So everything is quite visceral for me. And there are some people that are like that. Other people don't have as intense a physiological response. And can we rate subjective experiences? I don't know. But I like to think, and I think most eclipse chasers say that we can't think of anything else that would be more immersive and awe-inspiring in the intensity that a total solar eclipse has, that we can experience from this Earth. I just don't see if that's possible. And if we can at some point prove that objectively, that's great.
I actually want to follow up on that. Susanna Kohler, AAS. This kind of gets to what I was going to ask, which is, obviously this is very difficult because human research is messy and humans are messy and it's hard to tease out different things. But what did your sample of people look like and how do you think that impacted things? And I'll just give the example of my 1.5-year-old who his favorite word is wow. Like awe is his default state, whereas you live, you learn, you get jaded, maybe awe is harder to come by. Did you control it all for that in your sample?
Well, because this was a pilot and we were really just testing the feasibility of the approach, we didn't really, the people we selected were over 18, but the criteria was that they actually had to have a head that fit the standard headsets. That was the criteria because we wanted to make sure we could get the data that we wanted. And when you're young, everything is new and novel and different. And so when we're children, we have this wow experience with everything. And you're right, we've become a little bit jaded, don't we, as we get older? And but we can all tap into that childlike wonder. And I think there's a lot of research showing that when we experience awe on a regular basis as adults, actually that's really good for our health and mental health and well-being. And, you know, there's even moves to have awe prescriptions and, you know, finding our daily doses of awe. And what even our project found was that even things that we think are small awe make really good changes in our brainwaves that you can pick up with this equipment. So it sort of confirms that we don't need to wait for these big moments of awe. We can actually try and find that and have those moments every day.
Got a question over here.
I'm Katya Fosdick. I'm at MIT. I was just kind of curious, like how you actually calculate like an awe variable, like kind of what goes into that with the brainwaves.
And I think that's probably a question which is best directed to my co-investigator, because I guess this is his area of expertise, and he runs the Project Brainwaves lab at UTC. So perhaps we can chase up with direct contact and email with him. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Catherine Slaughter, University of Minnesota and Astrobytes. Not to sound like too much of a pessimist, I was wondering, because you I think the acronym was SPACED. You recognized all these different kind of steps that people go through when viewing a total solar eclipse. Has there been any effort to kind of try to observe any of those other steps in these brainwave patterns? I know personally one of my strongest memories from the total solar eclipse was kind of the anxiety you feel right as totality is starting. And so I'm curious if that has been something you've attempted as well.
So this is the first part of using this approach, and there are so many things that we can explore. The SPACED acronym is there, and it's not so much a sequence that everybody goes through like that, but these are the things that everybody describes. But those first few things, I think, do happen in sequence. You know, that sense of wrongness when it almost tips over, doesn't it? The world tips over and it just doesn't feel quite right. And then people talk about that primal fear, and that matches your subjective experience too. Or traditionally, we would have looked at it's a positive emotion, but it does have that negative connotation there too. A lot of people, when they think about awe, they think it's a positive thing, but the total eclipse elicits the two elements of it. I would love to be able to capture that side of it. So that's not something that we did pick up. And the brainwaves, we're able to see the intensity of the emotion. So that was one of the peaks, but also the valence as well. And that's the type of emotion. And that was clearly saying it was a positive emotion. There was nothing negative about that. So we do have the technology to be able to tease those things out. And I guess that's kind of for the future, isn't it? Thanks for the question.
So I was so wrapped up in this that I completely lost track of time. We have run over, so I'm afraid I'm gonna. Oh, one more question. No, we can take one more. We can take one more from you.
Hi. Hi, Darren Norman, Noir Lab. I was going to ask Amir what he's noticed that the other that the teams are doing with the kits that they've gotten. What else?
Also, a very good question. Thank you for asking. We haven't finished transferring all the equipment to everybody, but a number of people are already using the equipment for outreach, for star parties. Even before the eclipse, some of our teams were using the telescopes and cameras to show off the sun and the stars. And that's our hope. The idea of depositing that equipment into the communities at publicly accessible locations, so schools or libraries or museums, whatever that institution might be that can be publicly serving and can help people use that equipment. We're hoping that it has a long-lasting experience for them and a long-lasting benefit. So yeah, some people are already using it for star parties or for outreach on the sun. I'm hoping that in a couple of weeks or months, when that nova that's advertised now goes off, maybe people will use that to look at that. So we're also working on developing a curriculum to help people if they don't have to necessarily come up with ideas on their own. The outreach team that we have on CATE is working to develop a curriculum that we will also deposit with our communities to help them develop lesson plans or hobbyist plans on how to use that equipment for years to come.
Great, thank you. So let's thank all of our speakers again so much for being here. And thank you so much to any PIOs involved, one being in the room effectively, for helping them to get together press releases and prepare. Thank you to all of you for being here today and this week. Anybody joining online, really appreciate you all being here to join us. And normally this is where I would bring up the slides saying, we look forward to seeing you in National Harbor in January, but unfortunately it's not loading, so I can't do that. So you're just gonna have to take my word for it. We have a lovely logo for the meeting, and the meeting itself is gonna be even better than the logo. So we hope you will all join us there in January for the 245th meeting. And until then, clear skies.